TorahCafe.com.
In the few short minutes that I've been allotted, let me share with you some perspective. But let me start with a short Torah thought, which I think in many senses symbolizes the shaliach that you're accustomed to know, the shaliach in your neighborhood, individuals like Rabbi Eliezer and others. You all know the story. Abraham tells God, I have no children, you're promising me the future, but I have no kids. I have nothing to give it over to. And the story goes that God takes Abraham, says, come on outside, paraphrasing, come on outside and let me show you the stars. God took Abraham outside, and look at the heavens. Usfor hakochavim, and count the stars. Im tuchal lisper osam, if you're able to count them. Vayomer lo, and God said to Abraham, Ko yeh zarecha, so will be your offspring, your progeny. And simply, it means, go look at the stars. There's millions and billions. There, you cannot count them, and your children will be the same. There will be millions, and you will not be able to count them. There's another interpretation I'd like to share with you this morning. Rav Meir Shapiro, the creator of the Daf Yomi, the daily Daf, reads it a little different. And I'll share with you his editorial comment. Vayotzer so achutza, God took Abraham outside. Vayoma habetno hashamayim, look up to the heavens. Usfor hakochavim, and count the stars. Im tuchal lisper otam, you won't be able to. What would we do if God tells us it's impossible? Thank you very much. Let's go on. But what did Abraham do, says the Midrash? He started to count the stars. Because God told him, count the stars. Even though Abraham was told at the same time, it's impossible for you to count them. The impossibleness of something didn't stop Abraham. God said, count the stars, I count the stars. And God responded, Ko yeh zarecha. That trait of never giving up, of doing the impossible, of taking upon a challenge which God says you can't do, that personality and characteristic trait of always doing regardless of the odds, Ko yeh zarecha, that will be a characteristic trait of your children. In my travels, whether it be on behalf of the National Council of Young Israel, the Young Israel movement across the country, whether it be on my quests for my activities for Greater Eretz Yisrael, for Zionism, for Jonathan Pollard, or in my position as Executive Vice President, I was the fundraiser. And in fundraising, you all know, you go to places that you don't normally go. And I was able to interact with a lot of situations, a lot of shluchim. And I must tell you, partly because I was able to say I'm a friend of Rabbi Eliezer, the doors were always open. Wherever I went, whatever situation arose, there was somebody at the other end of the phone call. I remember I received a phone call, probably late one evening, from a dean, a Rosh Yeshiva of a Lithuanian yeshiva. And he says, friend, Pesach, one of my students, his father lives in Berlin, and he just died. And apparently, Berlin has very specific rules and regulations. You can't take the body out, whatever. What do I do? He doesn't know anybody in Berlin. We don't know anybody in Berlin. What do I do? Do you have any ideas? I said, Rabbi, stay on the phone. Then I called Rabbi Eliezer. And I said, I got an emergency. I need your help. And he listened to the story. And Rabbi Eliezer on his conference line called the Shaliach in Berlin. And he woke him up. And he woke him up, and the Shaliach responded, put him on a plane. I'll be here, waiting at the airport for when he comes. Let's share phone numbers so I can take care of the body and everything. I received a phone call 2 weeks later from that dean saying that's exactly what happened. I sent my student to Berlin. That shaliach met him in Berlin. He sat shiva in Berlin. The shaliach took care of everything from somebody at the end of the world. And that's not a unique story, not in my experiences, and I'm sure not in yours. I have a business associate. Grew up in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I think it was Oklahoma, not Tulsa. And he grew up Presbyterian, not knowing that he was really Jewish. And during his own research, he discovered that his great-grandparents were in the Kovna ghetto. They came over, and HIAS, the American organization, sent them to Oklahoma, and there were no Jews in Oklahoma. Right? But our association, we discovered that he was Jewish, and when his mother died, he wanted to have a Jewish funeral. I flew to Tulsa to help him out, and where are you going to say Kaddish? Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Chabad house. Right. I've been numerous times to take people down to see Jonathan Pollard and outside Raleigh, Durham. They need a minyan. Right. There's a place to call. There's someone to call. This is not a minyan. I cannot tell you how many times I had to say, thank you, I'm not hungry. I don't need a meal. I have a place to sleep. Right? Because they continuously, are you sure? Can we get you something? The Chabad shluchim that I've run into don't care where you're from, who you're from, what you're doing. They open up their doors, they'll do anything. Got a phone call once from a Hasidic Rabbi who had gone through the camps, and he had cancer. He was an elderly gentleman, and he was going for a second or third opinion in Nashville, Tennessee. The man barely spoke English. Nashville, Tennessee was not on his daily route. He called me up, and I called Rabbi Zalman Posner, Nashville, Tennessee. And he said, Rabbi, get me the information. Picked him up at the airport. He brought him to his house, gave him something to eat, took him to the doctor, brought him home, gave him a rest, and took him back to the airport. Right. And the Hasidic Rebbe, who has since been nifter, told me, I never heard of Nashville, Tennessee, but the Yiddish neshamas in Nashville, Tennessee. I can go on, right? The Chabad that you represent on a local level, on a regional level, on a national level, are involved in Jewish Federation. They're involved in the Joint Distribution Committee. They're involved in world events. They're involved in places and activities that you don't know about. I know some, trust me, even I don't know them all. But they're there. They're there, in my book, for a greater Eretz Yisrael. They care about other Jews. Rabbi Eliezer and I sit on numerous boards together working with other sects, other, I don't want to use the word streams, but other parts of Judaism. Right? He has earned their respect because he knows he loves every Jew. And that is the same of your shluchim, those that are here, those that you will meet, those that you interact with. So, from an outsider, an insider, let me suggest, this is an organization that is making a difference. And I encourage you, find the time, find the resources, find the ability to join them, that they can make a difference. Let me just share with you one more Torah thought, because this is a guarantee, comes directly from God. You put your time in, God will give it back to you. And we know the story. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are morally corrupt, to say the least. And God decides that it's time to destroy them. And he commented, Hamachaseh ani me Avram. Should I cover up, should I hide from Avram, Asher ani oseh, that which I'm doing? And the story goes that God comes down to Abraham and says, Abraham, it's a sick world, and I got to get rid of those that are sick. And Abraham shoots into action. Well, maybe there are 50 righteous people in all these cities. And maybe there are 45, and there are more, there are 40, etc., etc. Unfortunately, he can't save them, and the cities are destroyed. But the question is asked. Hamachaseh mi Avram. God asks, should I hide from Avram? What am I doing? Since when does God have to have permission from anybody? He does it. So the Chassam Sofer, the Moshe Sofer, lived in the 1800s. There's a long discussion, and I'll try to make it very, very short. Abraham was known as Av Hamon Goyim, the original godfather. right? The father of all nations. Not because it was a title bequeathed to him, something he earned. He was responsible. How could it be that the morality of the world, the moral environment stunk so bad that he didn't smell it in the spiritual realm? I mean, he was Av Hamon Goyim. He had a responsibility. That responsibility meant he was somebody of high moral character, spiritual character. How come he didn't feel it? How come God had to tell him? And the answer is, Hamachasani Am Avram, should I cover from Avram Asher Ani Oseh? And the pasuk continues, Ki Yodati Vaino Laman Shat Savri Azbanav B'nei Beiso. He's busy teaching, commanding his people, Lasso, Tzedakah, Mishpat, to do charity and justice. Do you know why Abraham wasn't able to smell the spiritual filth? Because he was not on the spiritual level he could and should have been. But before we get nervous, the question is why? Why wasn't he on that spiritual level? And the answer is because he was busy giving on God's word. We all know our children, our grandchildren come home this last couple of weeks from the parsha and they bring home this tent with 4 doors. Everyone knows that Avram was a chef, maitre d', the restaurant. People came in, he gave them what to eat. Sounds like a Chabad shaliach. Gave them what to eat. And they said, thank you. Don't thank me, thank God. God, who, what, where? He was busy teaching. He wasn't able to be on the spiritual heights that he should have been. So God said, it's not his fault he's not where he's supposed to be. It's my fault. He's doing my work. So God turns around and he says, well, if it's his fault, I got to ask his permission. I got to talk to him. I got to tell him. And says the Chassam Sofer, what happened at the end? Abraham was doing God's work. God turned around and gave to Abraham a present of the knowledge he didn't have. The Chassam Sofer concludes and tells us, and I'll adapt it. He says, if somebody comes to a student and says, will you learn with me? I need aleph beis, I need the beginning, I need this, I need that. Well, in the mind of a great Torah scholar, he's sitting there, wait a minute, to give him an hour, but if I had an hour, I could delve into the depths and breadths of the Talmud and the commentaries, and here I'm doing so much less. So the Chassam Sofer says, if God could give Abraham the information he was lacking, then there's no question he can give this budding scholar in 5 minutes or 10 minutes that which he would have taken 2 or 3 hours because he's doing God's work. May I extrapolate and say, if we're busy doing God's work with our resources, our finances, our time, helping out other Jews in our neighborhood, in our community, in the world at large, Abraham and God's actions, God's and Abraham's actions, tell us that God will make up the difference. And trust me, he will make it up difference multifold. So on behalf of a lot of people that are the recipients of the work of Chabad all over the world, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your involvement. You're part of an ongoing, moving, active organization. And I'm sure with your continued assistance, it will go to higher heights. Have a great day.